Dr. Elijah Painstsil. Dr. Painstsil came to us from Connecticut this morning. He's professor at Yale, and we had the pleasure of having him at the United Nations a few years ago. Now, what are his subjects? His subjects over at Yale are pediatric pharmacology, HIV/AIDS, um, what else? Epidemiology, and there's another one which he will tell us about. So we're very fortunate to have him.
Nanama Ajewa Kodia Bwahima Nkosahine, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm the only one in the room that can pronounce your Ghanaian name. And I am very excited to be here looking at the people in the room. It really warms my heart for your dedication to this course. And usually I go attend talks, and it's like the invitation time is 3 to 6 months. But I got this, I think, a week and a half. And then one of the topics was added to me only last night at 11 p.m. But again, being a Ghanaian, and Nana had called me, we very much respect elders. So I had to put away everything I was doing. I said, if Nana is calling, I have to come. So that's why I'm here with you today. So, and again, I think I have too much details, but I was also told that these slides will be made available for people in Ghana and for students. So don't worry so much. I will just discuss as we go on. Basically, this is a picture depicting when the Ebola crisis occurred in West Africa. That was the first time that West Africa had experienced Ebola, and everybody went into a panic mode. And the truth of it is that we knew that it was going to happen one day. We just didn't know when. And again, we know that it's going to happen again, because nothing really had changed since the last outbreak. And why does this happen? This is the situation of the African continent. The health systems in the continent can be depicted by this truck. So this truck is, it probably will be very difficult for anyone to drive this truck here in the US. But this truck is very active, and it's on the road and taking people. And I'm sure at the next stop, they will still take somebody on. So it tells you about how the systems are not there in Africa. And so Africa now serves as an incubator for a lot of the infections and emerging and re-emerging infections. So again, I don't want to bore you with a lot of rhetorics, but you just have to prepare. I mean, if you are going to war, you have to prepare yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to know your opponent. But I think we have gotten into a war that we have neglected both ourselves and our opponents. So we are losing the battle. We are really no longer strategic in winning battles. And as an infectious disease person, as much as I would be happy not to work, I think our systems in place are promoting work for me. I don't mind, but I think it's also not good for us all. The next slide, please. So quickly we'll go through this in an orderly way, and I may just because of those who will be watching online, but for us it will be more like a conversation. So let me share with you a little bit about the history of Ebola and why we are so interested in it. We do not really know how long Ebola had been with us, but the first recognition of it was 1976. So we go by that date, but it's possible that in the past, in Central Africa, people might have died of Ebola that we didn't know. It's also very possible that we probably now have developed techniques to identify some of these viruses. And as we get smarter and we get newer tools, we probably would see more viruses. Can you go to the next slide for me? So Ebola has a very a good, probably a family friend or a cousin of Ebola, was really the first that alerted us to the possibility that Ebola could be in Africa. And this is called in Central Africa, there you have wild animals, game, you have monkeys, and the African green monkey had actually been a source of a lot of viruses, from Ebola to Marburg to HIV and what have you. The interesting thing is that because and I'm showing you this slide to see in a very humor way, but because Africa didn't have the capacity to identify and diagnose, it took an African green monkey that went to Germany, Marburg, Germany, to a lab there, and they were using the kidneys of the monkey to propagate viruses, the polio virus. And that is when people in that lab got sick. And then they found out that, oh, they have a virus. This is not known in Germany, and was traced to this monkey. And the next one. And this was the first one, 1967, Marburg. So because of that, a lot of German scientists and scientists from Belgium actually were very interested. It killed about 3 lab persons. So they came to Africa. And usually they go to Africa for their own interest. They're just trying to see what next, what is coming. So they made a station there in Africa and started to study what are the viruses, what is there out there in the African jungle. Next. And that is this infection, the first again unfortunately occurred in Germany, and it looks like very few occurrences in Africa. It probably could also mean that maybe the virus had been in Africa for a long time, that people have developed immunity and they were not getting sick. So the introduction to a new environment really made us aware of this. Next. And this is definitely the home of the Central African corridor. That's where most of these viruses are coming from, and we'll talk about why probably that is so next. So in 1976, now we know Marburg. We know that Marburg is in Central Africa, but that was from the 1967 occurrence in Marburg, Germany, that was traced back. But 1976, something also happened. People started having fevers and rashes, and they were starting to bleed from their mouth, they have bloody stools, and they will pee blood and what have you. And it got an attention to what was going on. I have told you already that around that time there had been scientists from Europe in the Central African Republic area trying to study what's going on. So it was really very interesting. They got on this very, very quick. Next. And so the first case of Ebola actually occurred in a town in the former Zaire, Congo, now is the Democratic Republic of Congo. What happened was they were scientists at the time were very interesting. They were very ethical, and they really didn't really project themselves very well. And what they wanted to do, how do we name this new virus that we have seen? And so they decided that there is a river in the village where the first patient who got Ebola was. And the name of the river, which is a tributary of the River Congo, is Ebola River. So the name is what they named it after the river, just to make it neutral and not to implicate any country or any township. Next. And so this is the very beautiful, calm, flowing Ebola River that It's the virus didn't come from that, but it's just in the village at the banks of this river. Next. And this is actually one of the first patients with Ebola. And so this is way back in 1976. And look at how they were wearing protective equipment. And unfortunately, we will come to what happened a couple of years ago in West Africa. They even didn't have this protective equipment. I mean, it just, we don't understand some of these things, why things are really not thought of, because we knew that Ebola had been with us since 1976, and why didn't we really pay attention to that? Next, please. Now, I was actually going to say that I like this slide, but then I have, after Dr. Smith talking to us about immune system, and we've also had how to boost our immune system, and she said that you don't have to smoke, but I just like it again. I mean, this was a doctor taking care of patients with his pipe at the bedside. I mean, if you did that today, you probably would lose your job, or you would not be able to even to get to see the patient. So life there was very good in 1976. I wish I practiced then. So this is a patient that we were taking care of. Next. So Ebola had always concentrated in the Central African Republic, that bug. And they were getting it every year or every other year, but in very small numbers since the 1976 outbreak. And it had gone to about 2008. So we have known this, and I'm trying to emphasize that we know some of these things, but we just don't work at them, and we wait till it becomes a pandemic, and we all panic. And I think we don't need to. We know that this virus is there, and we have to. And also, I think it's also not the fault of us all, but sometimes things that occur in very deprived areas do not really catch the attention of the powers that be, because of how human beings have been. Probably we're not created to be selfish, but we have acquired that selfish DNA, and people don't think about others. We've come to appreciate that it's we and them, that mentality. And I think it will become important as we go on. Next slide. So this is how it was going, and it's actually very interesting. I mean, if you look at the last column, it's showing you how many cases they were getting per year in these places. And one that was actually high in the 2001 was an outbreak, there's a 425. So until that we got the 2013 to 2015 outbreak, this was the highest. It was just very smothering and low-key infection. Sometimes one person, and in other places in the double digits, and it wasn't really in the thousands ever. So next. So the case of the West Africa. So we've always known it in Central Africa, and West Africa now had become the new spot for Ebola when Ebola got transmitted or transferred to that. And unfortunately, because the people in West Africa have not they've not had that prior exposure to the virus, because in Central Africa, it's you can say that it had become endemic. It lives there, so people probably overcame infection and they were immune to that. But it was now very new to West Africa, and that's why it created that havoc. What I'm trying to say is that the next stop would even be higher than what we saw in West Africa, and how the cases were. Yeah, please next. And this is the summary of the West African one. Actually, it got to about almost 30,000 people, and it killed close to 12,000 people. And then I'm sort of rounding this up and coming from Africa. I know that sometimes these numbers are underestimated because people die in their villages and nobody really knows what happened to them. So you can imagine if you're seeing these numbers, then there are a lot more people who had not been accounted for. So this really opened our eyes that something is happening. Unfortunately, we made it a little bit political, so we didn't go in very quick and very early as we do always. But it's also taught us a lot of lessons. We started to think about, can we get a vaccine that we can immunize people to cut down this? And we also started talking about, can we even start developing drugs that can be used? So it's definitely did some good. Next. And so this is the cases of Ebola outside of Africa during the outbreak. And a lot of these were just imported. People who went to take care of people in Africa came back to the US. We had about 4 cases here, and you probably know all about them. And people who went to Europe as well. And then I think it became very, very important, and it took a sort of an international stage when it entered the US, and when we finally realized that we were not immune to. And if you look at how travel is now, I mean, you can actually have breakfast in New York today, and you can have lunch in somewhere in Africa, and probably do dinner in Europe. The travel time is very short, and I'm told in 1930 to go from London to Sydney, Australia, usually took 21 days. Now you can do this journey in about 16 to 18 hours. So when you have an infection, you'll be incubating, and some of these viruses may be in your body for at least 3 days to about 3 weeks before they start to show symptoms. So by the time the symptoms are showing, you're actually in a different continent or a different country. Can we see the next one? All right, so this is just a summary for those who would be reviewing online. Next. So then we thought things in the Central African Republic had gone down. We now have a current outbreak there. It looks like we didn't learn that much from what happened in West Africa. So it's gone back to where it is. And the unfortunate thing about it was that previous outbreaks in Central Africa, the total numbers were probably, the maximum was like about 500. The infections are still going on, and now we are up to about 1,200. So this outbreak in Central Africa, it's worse than previous. You saw on that slide that sometimes they had only 1 person or 12 people or 100. Now in the thousands, and unfortunately the world is still looking to see what is going to happen. I mean, I think we've not learned much, and I think human beings, we have very short memory, and if we are not careful, this is going to go on, and somebody would go there, bring it to other countries, and then we become very scared. Next slide. So I do infectious diseases, and if people ask me why you do infectious disease, I tell them that viruses and bacteria are very beautiful. So this is Ebola virus. So you have the virus. It's inside there, and it's surrounded itself with what we call envelope. And these viruses are very, very smart, and that's why some of us are excited to be studying them. So the envelope that they have, it's actually, they take the host cell membrane. So if they infect a person, they produce more viruses, and they take the covering of your cell, part of it. Why is that important? So that you don't recognize it as foreign. You would think that it is yourself, so that they can keep causing problems in you. And I think that it's just amazing. And then also what they're covering, what is important, the envelope they have. Usually, when we say that if there is a foreign body in your body, and it has proteins, it's called antigen. The body will be able to recognize. So what these viruses do is, as they are coming out of the cell, they cover themselves with a lot of sugar. So the envelope is sugar. So it's not immunogenic. The body that cannot find that. So the body, we all like sweets, right? So the body would say, oh, this is just sugar, let it float around, not knowing that the virus is inside. So they are very powerful. That's why they really can go on to do that. If they didn't have that, the body would straight away recognize them as not part of the body, and it will be killed. And that's why we have a lot of problems really dealing with viruses. They are very, very clever. And I am hoping that one day I would be as intelligent as a virus. And I will figure out a lot of things. Next. So, again, it's still controversial where Ebola is, or what is the reservoir. But I believe that it's probably these wild animals, monkeys, probably are also end hosts like human beings. And it's believed that probably the bats, fruit bats, are really the main, the source, the reservoir. So they get into them, but they didn't cause disease. So the virus can then grow and multiply. And then when the bat bit someone, or you come into contact with the secretions of the bat, you get infected. So I think that's how we have come to believe this. Next. This is a very busy one, but I'm going to sum it up, and then just for the sake of those who would have this slide. So what are the kind of features? If someone has Ebola, how do they look like? And I always make a joke that that's why I went to infectious disease. It's really the easiest discipline of medicine that you can think of. All the infections give you the same symptoms. And so I don't need to know what HIV gives or this gives. I just have to memorize a few symptoms, and I can always use them. So that is the strategy. That's why some of us went to infectious diseases. Again, having said that, that's also it's very challenging. Then you don't know which infection is which. Right. Because a lot of them, all the symptoms that you are having, it's actually due to your body fighting the infection. And the body uses the same pathway to fight the infection. So that's why they look similar. You have fever. You would have fever with the flu, with HIV, with Ebola. So if you have fever, I mean, sometimes we get so complacent, oh, this is just the flu. I will just sleep it off. You never know. So that's what makes infectious disease also very challenging. It's usually can go on from when you get a virus, probably 3 to 14 days incubation, and the symptoms occur. And the symptoms can go on for up to 21 days if you are going to recover. Those who die usually die in the second week. And you have just general malaise in the first week, just like having the flu. And then in the second week is when you start to bleed from your mouth, from peeing, from diarrhea, and what have you. And that is what actually takes a lot of body fluid from you, and you go into shock. And every secretion that comes from these people are very, very infectious. So this is just the way we diagnose now is just testing. We know how to test the blood for it, or bodily secretion. Next. And this is just telling you the sequence of the when you get a fever, when the other things come in, as we've discussed. And then the top panel shows you how we diagnose. We now have what we call the PCR, polymerase reaction, that is able to really give us the viral particle itself. The other method of knowing is to see if the virus has developed antibodies in the person that we call it serology. And good. Next. This is actually the first patient and how the fever curve went. Without any treatment, you would have fever on and on and on, and probably in your third week just pass away. Next. So we are fortunate now. I mean, there are some experimental drugs, but they're very expensive, and unfortunately, we have seen ourselves in a very greedy world that the pharmaceutical companies, and when they get something that will save life, they actually want to make more money out of that. So if you are in Africa and you have Ebola, just forget it. These drugs will not get to you. If you are here and you have good insurance, then you'll be covered. If not, even if you are gainfully employed, you may not be able to afford a 2-week course of some of this. I don't know why they do that, but they do, and they will continue to do that. Next. So the interesting thing, and I told you that what the West African Ebola taught us, it's actually, even though we went in from America late, we took a lesson. So America decided to say that, how can we stop this? So the National Institute of Health took it upon itself, invited scientists, let us brainstorm and develop a vaccine. As we speak, there are about 6 candidate vaccines. One actually is already in the field. It was used in Guinea, and now they are deploying it in the Congo for this outbreak. And it is very, very potent that people who get it, it doesn't contain the virus. The African presidents and countries were very worried, and the vaccine issue has always been very tricky, not only here, but in Africa. I mean, people still believe that HIV was through vaccines, that the West wanted to just extinguish Africa and brought that. So those things are still there. So people really don't trust vaccine much. So what this vaccine actually does, it doesn't contain the virus itself. It's been engineered to look like the virus. So when you take it, it cannot infect you. And then some African countries were happy to do that. Unfortunately, my own country, Ghana, our president didn't want it because of the fear that we would infect the population, even when it's been explained to them that this is not. So that is also the mistrust that we're dealing with. Next. And one thing that the U.S. does well, and usually they don't say some of these things, but U.S., apart from its military powers, it's also very good at infectious disease control. We have the CDC, and they actually have a lot of stations all over the world. So now they have posts all over Africa, and there is an agenda. Unfortunately, the current president wants to do away with this agenda, the global health security, where the U.S. is supporting countries to be active in finding these infections. In our own small way, I mean, think about this and see how you can help and educate people and let people really get to know that. Thank you very much.